This week we are going to be continuing in our series in the Psalms, but just heads up, okay? I'll give you the this is the hard word first. The psalm we are going over today is probably the saddest, most depressing psalm in all of the Psalter, okay? In all the book of Psalms. But so I want to give you the heads up. As we jump into this, some of us are going to have this question like, why is this in here? What is this about? And what is God doing? But I want to talk about psalms like, specifically this psalm, because this is really the one and only, in a lot of ways, it's the one and only psalm like this. Everything in Scripture is there for a reason and has something, God has something for us in it. And so I want us to consider why God has included this specific psalm. And as we're going to see, it's a psalm about darkness. Okay, darkness. So what I want to do is I want to pray for us here, and then I want to open up, I want to get into what that darkness means and what it looks like for us to actually wrestle with this conceptually as it's given to us in Scripture. So let's go ahead and pray. Holy Father, there's something for us in this text. And Lord, you've known the darkness. You've seen it. You've experienced it. You've felt it. You've walked that path. And in that, we have something of it as part of our inheritance, as part of our knowing the life you've given us, as bearing our cross. And there's something here, Lord, that's personal for each one of us. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know how to say that to each person. But I pray today that you will teach us through this psalm how your gospel reaches out to us, reaches us, even in the darkness, as a place of knowing you more, and as a place of trusting you from within this quiet place. Teach us now, and go ahead through the work of your Spirit. Praise Jesus. Okay. Anybody familiar with this character, St. John of the Cross? Anybody ever heard of him before? This 15th century monk, all right? And he's most famously known for what is called the Dark Night of the Soul. It's very, for this song's very meaningful and existential indeed, but it sort of is. And I'm not actually going to talk much about St. John of the Cross today, but what I would like to talk about is that concept, the Dark Night of the Soul. And what he means by that. There's a prayer that I stumbled across this week that I think really encompasses the dark night of the soul. And I'll talk more about this prayer later. But it was penned by one woman to her superior, someone else, in 1957, and she was expressing her own struggle with darkness. This is the prayer that she penned, which she shared with the recipient. She says, "In the darkness, Lord my God, who am I that you should forsake me, the child of your love, and now become as the most hated one, the one you have thrown away as unwanted, unloved. I call, I cling, I want, and there is no one to answer. Where I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is such a convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my very soul. Love, the word, it brings nothing. I am told God lives in me, and yet the reality of darkness and coldness and emptiness is so great that nothing touches my soul." Almost sounds blasphemous, doesn't it? Certainly maybe irreverent. Something in there that we have to wrestle with. But as you know, in the Psalms, we're dealing with all sorts of emotions. This concept of how we approach God in whatever state we find ourselves in. We've talked about guilt and fear and grief, and believe it or not, we're going to talk about some happy things the next couple of weeks. Chose all the dark ones first. But this week, darkness, I kind of consider among them. And we'll talk more about what that is, actually. But of all the Psalms in the Psalter, like I said, all of them, almost all of them, end with, there's lots of songs of lament, right? These are, I'm going through a hard time, this is the trouble I'm experiencing, but then they give you some hope, right? But this is who God is, this is where I'm at, then I saw the light, this is my joy, this is my hope, right? But Psalm 88, I won't read it all out for you if you right now, but if you want to open up your Bible and take a look, it's really interesting because you never get there. There's no resolve. The last line of the psalm, and actually in Hebrew, darkness is the very last word. It's there for emphasis, but it says, the last line of Psalm 88 is, my closest friend is darkness. And so I think this concept is here, this psalm is here for you and I to be able to at least wrestle with that concept of what do we do with our darkness? When we find ourselves in darkness, what does that mean? And why does God allow such a thing in our lives? So I want to go ahead and I want to begin at Psalm 1, verse 1, or Psalm 88, verse 1. Lord, you are the God who saves me. Okay, things are looking pretty good. Verse 1, we're doing all right. This is the earliest line of the psalm, and it's a line of faith. God alone is the one whom the psalmist believes will save him, but this is also the high point of faith for the psalm. Okay? If we read through verse 1 and into verse 2, we discover that it's faith, but this is a unique kind of faith. This is faith that we see throughout Scripture. I think a faith that you and I need, but it's faith seeking understanding. Okay? He says, day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. And so we need to understand this is a person who wants God, but can't find him. All right? This is whether it's due to their present circumstances or not, there's this sense that says, I want to know God. Why can't I know him? Why can't I find him? Why can't I find resolve in him? Why won't God either fix my situation? Why won't God fix my heart? Why won't God fix my mind? Why can't I find this soul fix that I long for? And he tells us a little bit about why he's feeling this way in verse 3. He says, I'm overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. And in verse 4 and 5 he kind of expounds on this. He talks about how he feels dead already. How he feels laid out. He feels powerless. Okay? And while he doesn't tell us the specifics, we can infer a few things, all right? Sometimes your darkness and mine accompanies a pretty terrible situation. Okay? These questions of doubt, of fear, of anger, of emptiness, of not being able to find God, sometimes they go along with a very specific circumstance in our lives. Now, this could be due to bodily injury or bodily suffering, sickness, injury, the wear and tear of old age, potentially. I don't know if you've ever had one of these moments. For me, I have just this phase. For some of you who've really wrestled with long-term injuries and illness, this probably sounds silly, but it's my silly moment. Okay, so I'm going to share my silly moment with you. When I was 18 years old, I tore my ACL, and I went in and I had surgery on it. And while I had surgery on my ACL, I didn't know that I was really allergic to general anesthesia. And so when I woke up, I spent like 10 hours in the post-op room just wanting to die. I was so sick and so nauseated. This is probably disgusting and too much information, so you can feel free to cover your ears if you'd like at this point. But I was dry heaving so hard that I was pulling up bile from my intestines and puking it up. I couldn't even take ice chips because my body was rejecting everything that went in me so hard. And I remember laying there and just thinking, if I could just choose to die right now, I would. Because at some point, life becomes so much less than you feel it should be, right? So there is this kind of potential darkness, right? Where we don't know why we're here and we can't understand why this kind of suffering would be part of what we think should be a good life. And I don't know what it is for you. You can fill that in. The second thing, the psalmist could be suffering from so if that's sort of an external darkness, the bodily darkness, the psalmist could be suffering from an internal darkness, right? This could be some sort of mental suffering. Often people go through times or bouts with depression, anxiety. This could be situational, such as the death of a loved one, or divorce, or losing a job. But it could also be clinical, not necessarily related to any specific instance, but something more going on with the chemistry of the body. And of course, there's plenty of other plethora of mental illnesses and struggles, from addictions and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and dementia, and things that are real struggles that bring a sense of real darkness and pain to our lives. Once again, I don't know what it is for you. For me, I think there's been several times in my life where I've had one thing or another that's just kind of thrown me for a loop. And I remember being in high school, and saying just to use kind of some early examples that I think we can relate with this. I remember actually being kind of depressed to the point when I was in high school, at one point where I remember having to tell myself to smile, because you're like, I remember being in a thing, talking with people, and thinking, I don't remember actually smiling because I was happy for like a year and a half, or 2 years, or 3 years, or something like that. And have to be like, oh, this is the time where they expect me to smile. I don't know if anybody bought it. But you give those awkward smiles, right? We have those. I don't know what it is for you, but it might be one of those. And verse 8, he says, "You have taken from me my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them." And in these verses, the psalmist is suffering this outward darkness, but this includes sort of relational suffering. He's lost the closest human relationships. The word there that's translated friends is probably a more general word. It could be companions in the Hebrew. But really what we're talking about is just this relational suffering, right? I've lost my sense of identity with my workplace compatriots. I've lost my sense of self in the family. I've lost my sense of self, of friendship in this group, right? It reminds me of Job, who's he's lost his physical family. He's lost the affection of his wife. His friends come and judge him, right? He's left out on his own. And we've all gone through things before like this, the loss of friends and family. There's bitterness and there's arguments and there's dating relationships that end, and you can kind of fill in the blank for what it might be for you. But I think the most important part when we're talking about this concept of darkness and we're talking about these situations is that the darkness is not the situation. Okay? This psalm it doesn't give us the specifics of the situation, because the specifics aren't actually what really matter about the darkness. The darkness is the empty space in our souls where God should be. Okay? The darkness is the place where we go, you can suffer bodily and you can suffer mentally, and you can still have this point of faith in your heart that goes, but I know that the Lord is good, and I know that He's meeting me here, and I'm sustained in this, and the Lord has met me, and it's good, right? And this is saying, regardless of the circumstance, there's this part where I cannot find that. I know God is there. I believe in Him. I want to have a relationship with Him. And yet this distance, so real. I believe that God is all-powerful, that God is all-knowing, that God is everywhere present. And yet this cold, distant nothingness in my heart, it feels like an accusation against God. It feels like God has abandoned me. And the psalmist seems to do this too. He lashes out a bit. He seems to have this issue with, it feels like an accusation to him too. God, how come this isn't different? In verse 5 he says, I'm set apart from the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. And really, he's arguing with them. He's arguing with himself here, right? He's basically saying, if God really cared, He'd do more. If God really cared, He'd show up. If God really cared, he'd answer my cries, okay? So he accuses God of cutting him off from his care, and he's sort of just having this mental argument with himself. In verses 10 through 12, he gets sarcastic, right? And we've been here too, right? Where we just think God is stupid. God must be a dummy. He accuses God of being foolish. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave and your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? He's saying, does praise come from the living or the dead, God? What do you think? You answer the question, all right? Does praise come from good works or evil works? Right? Is evil done on the earth so that you're praised? Is that really what we're all about? Does praise come from darkness or light, God? Can you answer that question? I don't know, maybe some of you are like me, and you've had those moments where you think, excuse me, this is so dumb. This is the dumbest plan. You have a stupid plan. Feel bad even saying it right now. Like God's like, hey. But we want to sometimes, don't we? Maybe you don't really believe it's a stupid plan, but you don't understand it either. It doesn't seem like a good plan. It certainly doesn't feel like a good plan, and you can't necessarily see the resolve that you assume God has in it somehow, that He's going to answer somehow your prayer, that this is being worked for good, and yet in the moment there's this question, what does it mean? Why is God doing this? And then in verse 15, he shows us something else. We can argue with ourselves and accuse God of not caring. We can get sarcastic and accuse God of being foolish. But we can also embellish a little bit. And I think verse 15 we get this. From my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and I am in despair. In other words, all my life you've been abandoning me. God, this is just a story. This is what it's been like the whole time. And in our darkest moments, we seem to reframe our narratives in terms of us as the protagonist and God as the antagonist. And we say things like this, right? It's always been this way. God never hears me. God is never for me. God never answers me. Why must I always suffer? But is this true? I want to take a step back and tell you why I think this is just an embellishment. Okay? It could be that God has always been embellishing him, or has always been abusing him. But there's a heading on this psalm, and most of you should be able to see this, right? It's a psalm of the sons of Korah from the director of music, according to Machalath Leonath, a maskil of Haman the Ezrahite. Most of that doesn't matter for us. Haman the Ezrahite and the sons of Korah do. Okay? So what this little thing tells us here is that this is a song of worship. This would have been sung potentially by individuals, but also by congregations. This is a communal song for a worship service. And once again, most of us are thinking, this doesn't seem like a worship. If I had Paul turn this into music and we all sang this one day, you'd be like, that was the worst. That was the worst. I'm going somewhere else. All right? But the man who wrote this psalm, a man named Haman, he's named in 1 Corinthians 6, 33 and 34 as the grandson of Samuel the prophet. Those of you who read through Samuel was the spiritual leader, the judge, the authority, the last judge of the king of Israel before they brought in the king. So this is his grandson, comes from that line. And we're told in chapter 16 that he was hired by the king to give thanks to God for his love. And that later in chapter 25, we're told that Haman had many sons and daughters, and they followed in their father's footsteps under King David. I'll read a couple verses for you. All these were the sons of Haman, the king's seer, according to the promise of God to exalt him. For God had given Haman 14 sons and 3 daughters. They were all under the direction of their father in the music in the house of the Lord, with cymbals, harps, and lyres for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Haman were under the order of the king. So Haman is listed as one of these 3 main musicians appointed by King David for the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals. His whole family followed in his footsteps. God has promised to exalt him. And even that term seer, right? In the Old Testament, this is the term where, this is kind of one of the prophetic gifts, where he potentially received visions from God and potentially communicated with the king about those things. Yet the last words in the psalm, your wrath has swept over me, your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me my friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. And you go, well, if I list off that biography, and then I put it right along this psalm, seems odd. Doesn't seem to fully encapsulate this man, his calling, his life, or God's feelings about him. Doesn't seem like God doesn't care. And I think what we need to do is I think we need to take a step back and look at this concept of darkness a little bit broader. Because in that moment, in the very moment that you and I find ourselves in the darkness, that tunnel vision, I think we're given this psalm because the Psalms tell us, those are prayers that tell us this is for people to express where they're at, and the Bible's real, right? The Bible knows that there are going to be times where this will be the most honest prayer of your heart. But it's a prayer. There are times where you will have nothing good to say to God, but you're saying it to him. In the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, the authors recount for us that while Jesus, the Son of God, was hanging on the cross, crucified and bleeding, darkness fell over the land for 3 hours. And we read, and about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Christ found himself broken in body. He was crucified and scourged, a crown of thorns thrust on his head. He was broken in mind, and don't hear this as he lost it or anything. But this is, we have to remember that while he was fully cognizant, even before his crucifixion, as he's praying in the garden, he's sweating drops of blood as his capillaries literally burst in his skin from the stress he's under, from the anxiety and the fear that he's experiencing. It was real. He's broken in his relationships. All of his disciples have abandoned him. The justice of his own people have abandoned him. The justice of Rome has abandoned him. And beyond all these circumstances, now the Father, that connection, the truest source of his life, the connection with the Father, his love, his hope, God himself seems to be gone. And it's in this moment that the truest darkness of Haman, sometimes you, but sometimes me, has descended upon Christ himself. Now, what you may or may not know is that line that Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's the starting line of Psalm 22. And by the end of the psalm, it ends this way. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations, and all the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive, posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to the people yet unborn, he has done it. It's the psalm that declares total victory of God in the end, his goodness, his love ruling over the world. And yet, the psalm has a resolution. He could have kept quoting, but he didn't. And I don't think he did because I think he wasn't there yet, right? Darkness had come over the land. Darkness had come over his soul, and he tells us where he was at in that darkness. Now, I want to bring us back to that prayer that I shared with you at the beginning. I'm going to read it one more time. In the darkness, Lord my God, who am I that you should forsake me, the child of your love, and now become as the most hated one, the one you have thrown away as unwanted, unloved? I call, I cling, I want, and there is no one to answer. Where I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is such convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my soul. Love, the word, it brings nothing. I am told God lives in me, and yet the reality of darkness and coldness and emptiness is so great that nothing touches my soul. Do you know who wrote this poem, or wrote this prayer? This was penned by Mother Teresa, a woman who will likely go down as one of the greatest saints of the age. She spent her life serving the poor, living in poverty and squalor, giving herself away and speaking on the gospel of Jesus Christ and his saving love. You know, what people don't know is that actually, when we talk about the dark night of the soul, when we talk about this experience of darkness, Mother Teresa actually experienced a profound darkness most of her life. We sort of think that doesn't sound right, but I want to read something to you from an article I read this week, and I thought this was helpful. In Mother Teresa's dark night, we can hear all the anguish of her century, the desolation of the poor, the cries of the unwanted children, of the atheist, of all those who can't murmur a prayer or feel to love anymore. It was as if in some way she was bearing their sufferings, and in this she seemed to in some way to be sharing too in the sufferings of Christ. In you today, this is a quote, in you today, he wants to relive his complete submission to the Father, she wrote in 1974 to a priest suffering his own spiritual darkness. It does not matter what you feel, but what he feels in you. You and I must let him live in us and through us in the world. We now see that these words are beautifully autobiographical, reflecting her awareness that in her emptiness and poverty, she was being mystically grafted into the life of Christ, being emptied as he was in assuming our humanity, and being crucified as he was in offering himself for us. In her dark night, Jesus was claiming Mother Teresa for his own, pledging himself to his spiritual bride, pruning away her self-love and pride, purifying her in heart, mind, and intention, stripping away all that would keep her from total union with him. And the authors of this article did something kind of neat. They took a series of lines from her letters, and they kind of composed this some final thoughts on this concept of lasting darkness in her life. And so I've got a series of these here that are also from Mother Teresa. She said, "For my meditation, I am using the Passion of Jesus. I am afraid I make no meditation, but only look at Jesus suffer and keep repeating, Lord, let me share with you in this pain. In my pain and suffering, my darkness and separation give you a drop of, if my pain and suffering, my darkness and separation give you a drop of consolation, my own Jesus, do with me as you wish. I am your own. Imprint on my soul and life the suffering of your heart. In my separation from you, if my separation from you brings others to you, I am willing with all my heart to suffer all that I suffer, for your happiness is all that I want. I have begun to love my darkness, for I believe now that it is a very small part of Jesus' darkness and pain on the earth. I want to satiate your thirst with every single drop of blood that you can find in me. Please do not take the trouble to return soon. I am ready to wait for you for all eternity." Jesus came for her on September 5th, 1997. But there's something really beautiful, I think, about how, as Jesus bore all of our sin and shame, as the darkness of evil came over him in this world, he faced that darkness, not because of anything he would get, not because you first loved him, but just because he loves you and knew the Father's love. And unlike many of the messages we sometimes get about religion, to know Christ To know Christ is to be invited into that darkness at times. To know that Christ walked through the darkness, and in the darkness, he walks with us still. When you face it, you will have questions. You will struggle. It will not be easy, and sometimes your prayers will end with "darkness seems like my only friend." But it does not mean that that's the end of the song, or the end of the story, or end of the psalm. We have a big enough God who will meet with you and commune with you in your darkness, even when you don't feel like there is an end. And when he allows children to dwell in darkness, it's not because he doesn't care. In fact, it's the opposite. Don't get me wrong, there are times when we struggle with sin and everything else, and we allow darkness into our lives, and at that time we should repent, and we should move away from those things. But there are times where we try to trust the Lord with all our heart, and we still don't know. And in these times, I think this is an opportunity for, just as Jesus, and I think even as Teresa at times, to say, somehow, when I was invited into faith in Jesus, I was invited into his resurrection, but I was invited into his grave. And that through knowing the darkness and through knowing the suffering, I ultimately know the love of Christ and his love for me. I want to go ahead and I want to pray for us, and then we're going to go into a time of communion where we get a chance to celebrate this very body and blood, the darkness that overcame Christ, for the light that rose him.